Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and today I want to talk about how we kind of make a deal with the devil when we subscribe to egoic identity. And it is a deal that is made before we were smart enough to know the price that we pay for doing this. So we go back to early childhood. We go back to how several developmental and normal events in our life create traumatic circumstances that our mind is not ready or prepared to contend with, and certain psychosomatic painful affects that we can't allow ourselves to feel. They're too much in a sense. And when these arise, the mind comes up with a very clever avoidance tactic, which is to create a mental world, and a false sense of self that it attaches to the physical body. So from having no sense of self, which is what a baby essentially is, we now have a sense of being a me, and that me is inside the body. And that body is inside or surrounded by a world that is foreign to it. And that world presents threats and sources of pleasure. And from there on, as we consider ourselves to be a mind inhabiting a body, which is inhabiting a world, we will now embark on a lifelong pursuit of happiness, a lifelong pursuit of safety, validation, and gratification, in a lifelong escape away from things that threaten to take those away and create discomfort, dysphoria, and pain. Now, when we make the move towards body identification as children, this move is not only necessary, but it's completely natural. It is the only defense that we have against very painful affects that we are not ready to feel. However, we also sign a deal with the devil when we do that, because we sign up for disassociation. We sign up for escape. We sign up for obscuration and unclarity. In developing body identity and a sense of self that is individual or individualistic, we can only do that by repressing most of our perceptions to the subconscious, especially most of our unwanted perceptions. And we need to keep a lid on those perceptions all the time, lest they pop out and screw up our perfectly created little Legoland type of life. And what we fail to realize when we make this disassociative move is the price that we pay for it. In other words, if the ego was the devil, he would come every morning and say, listen, you know all these painful things that you're not willing to recognize about yourself, you know all these painful realities about life that you're not really ready to contend with? Don't worry about them. Let me take care of that. And all you need to do is look away. That's all you need to do, actually. You just need to place your attention elsewhere. Place your attention in a spurious mental sense of self that is projecting itself into time. You'll project yourself into scenarios of the past that you miss, or scenarios of the future that you wish would come to pass and give you hope. You'll place your attention and therefore you'll give yourself little dopamine spikes through those kind of like reminiscing and hoping. Or you place your attention and your spurious sense of self in a past that you want to avoid. And so you'll feel the fear, and therefore you'll feel like you have a sense of control towards it, and therefore get a dopamine spike from that as well. or you place your attention in worries about the future and you're scared the hell out of yourself, but you get a kick out of feeling that you are contending and grappling with problems and therefore preventing things from happening to you, right? And while you're doing all that song and dance in your head, real life will pass you by, but don't let that, don't let that distract you away from distraction. You do your distraction, and you let life pass you by, but you'll be fine. So the price that we pay for disassociation is our very own life, actually, right? Like there's a heavy price to pay for living an egoic or an ego, body, mind, identity based life. And the price to pay is life itself, as a matter of fact. So we sign a deal with the devil when we do that. When we awaken, there is a kind of figure ground reversal that takes place, almost as if we are seeing life from the other side of the mirror, is the best way that I could describe it. So there's two ways of seeing life. One of them is to see it as I am a little me inside the body, typically behind my eyes, which is at the mercy of bodily affects that feel ugly and which I cannot avoid, and all I can do is dream myself away from them, and also surrounded by a world that promises things that I can't seem to get and threatens me with situations that I can sometimes avoid and sometimes not. That's one paradigm, and it is one perceptual filter. That is the default perceptual filter. In that state of affairs, we are a beggar. We are a beggar because we feel a terrible sense of lack and absence and vulnerability that cannot be placated no matter what we do. So we go out in the world begging for validation, begging for safety, begging for pleasurable affects, and we are at the mercy of whether the world will give that to us or not. And we arm ourselves to the teeth with mental and emotional tactical strategies and physical tactical strategies to try to gather that validation from the environment. If that sounds like narcissism, that's because it is, okay? It need not be pathological in its expression to be fundamentally narcissistic in nature. So we beg. It's just that our begging is very sophisticated. But the beggarship, the empty, needy core that requires feeding all the time is always active and always pressing us to move, talk, emote, and do things. And the other perceptual filter that we could use is very, very different, in which every datum of experience, including the visual field, the auditory field, the thinking, the content of the thinking mind, and our very persona, our very sense of self, are all seen as happening in mind, in our mind. Yeah. So that our mind becomes a big empty context in which things are playing out, including our very own sense of self and our very own perception of our body. Yeah. So you could say that spirituality is a process of disidentifying from context and becoming disidentifying from content and becoming the empty context in which everything is taking place. That context is so empty, it cannot allow for anything that has qualities to be identified as I. If it has qualities, it's not I. That means, once again, and I've said this before, that our very sense of self is nothing but a sense, like the sense of smell. It's just a different type of sense. It's a much more implicit, insidious, and fundamental sense. And when we make the move to the perceptual filter of I am empty knowingness, in which my mental sense of self, body sense of self, and the world and all its content appears, then we are in the fullness of our being, and we we become almost like you become the monarch of of everything inside your consciousness. It's almost as if saying that at that point the world and the ego become little entities that live in your garden, and you are the gardener of that garden. It is happening within you. Your sense of self is happening in you, the world is happening in you, or at least your perception of it, right? So all perceptions are happening in you, you are none of them. And you become the caretaker or the groundskeeper for all of these things. And since they are all you, perceptually speaking, you don't contend with any of them. And you don't pin one against another or try to use one to obtain another, or try to bump things and use one thing to get another, because things acquire a kind of quality which is self-fulfilling, and everything is exactly what it is in and of itself, and it is not to be used against something else or in combination with anything else, because there is no else or other. Now, another way that, to say this is that you've gone from being a bug in the gardener to be the gardener of the garden. You can see how big a difference that is. It's order. A bug in the garden is looking around. It's a dung beetle. Doing its thing or whatever. And the gardener has infinite degrees of freedom and peace that bug cannot possibly enjoy, because the bug is a piece of content, completely subjected to its environment and its own little needs and wants or whatever. And the gardener is simply attending to the garden. It doesn't really do anything to it, but it also cannot be affected by it. Now, to flip from the first mode of perception in which we are a thing amongst things and a individuality surrounded by foreignness and pleasure and threat, to being mind in which self and other inhabit as one big bubble of perception, to flip between those two is awakening, and it's the big trick. In order to make that is a very difficult flip. It's you can't really make that flip happen unless you chip away at the crudeness of perception in the egoic identification mode of perception. You need to be able to see through it. That's why I spoke about stepping to the other side of the mirror. To be able to see through the incorrectness of perception A versus perception B, your mind needs to become stable and refined. Stability allows you to see things long enough to start to notice the cracks and the inconsistencies of the whole egoic mode of perception. And refinement is what discriminates and says, oh, I thought this was a foreign object, and I thought I was a self, but my perception is now so refined that what used to be a sense of self has now been sort of like a fan. It has opened, and I'm discerning now that my sense of self is just a composite made up of a bunch of things, none of which are I, none of which are really self. Well, that's interesting. I thought I was a someone, but I can't find it. And whenever I look for it, all I come across is painful affects that don't want to be seen or felt. That's interesting. So it kind of means that my sense of self really is just a bunch of painful psychosomatic affects holding me hostage. And not only am I hostage to them, I'm actually enamored with them. It's a full-blown case of Stockholm syndrome. My ego holds me hostage through pain, and I actually love it. You see? And so the only way out of this, the only way to reduce the crudeness of the egoic mode of perception is to be able to refine our mind, stabilize our mind, and with that stability and refinement grows a degree of clarity and also a degree of self-trust and willingness to enter painful affects which constitute the bubble that can't be broken through. I believe it's Zen, or it might be another Buddhist branch that speaks about the gateless gate. How do you flip from being an ego to being pure awareness? How does that perceptual flip happens if there's no real gate in between? Well, there is no real gate in between to speak of, and we are already pure awareness, but the perception is skewed by the crudity of our mind. The grossness and the crudeness of our mind is what makes perception, egoic perception, possible. It's an obscuration. It's an obscuration that has happened unwillingly at first, and then it gets preserved by force of habit. And because all of society is hell-bent on keeping it going that way, as a matter of fact, nobody wants to wake up to the fact that no one is anybody, and that the world is in mind, at least from a perceptual basis. I don't want to make big, ominous or big philosophical claims here. So it comes back to doing the work of mental cultivation to refine the mind, refine consciousness, and when consciousness becomes refined, it flips to a non-egoic mode of perception. It does that on its own. Insight arises in spite of our ego, not because of our tactical or mental attempts at figuring this out. So work on the buoyancy, clarity, and stability of your mind. Do the practice of embodiment, breath work, self-cultivation, and self-inquiry to clarify, and that will create the flip. Without that flip, you will be a thing amongst things, and you will be scared. Body identity and ego come with shame and fear by default, even if you can't feel them as presently as that. It is just your default state. It's very, something small goes wrong, and immediately the ego shows its teeth or its ugly side. So that's today's video. It's this notion of being a beggar in our own kingdom when our perception is crude, and how practices allow us to flip to a mode of perception in which we are the king of our kingdom, or the monarch of our kingdom, and we are no longer a beggar, and neediness, shame disappear as a result of that. I'm very curious to hear what you guys make of that topic, and as usual, if you believe that these talks can be beneficial to others, then your liking, sharing, and subscribing makes the channel ever more visible out there. It's very motivating to me, so thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more pretty soon. Cheerio.